Hi and welcome, Jake Bernardes again on Risking It All. I'm actually in the lobby of an office building today, so if I do get cut off at any point, you'll get Simon joining me because who knows, I may get escorted out, but we'll see how it goes. Welcome again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into this one because I'm going to have quite a lot of time and a lot of conversation. I've got Josephine Robinson with me today, new bestie of sorts, fascinating with a lot of views, different views, insights and interesting different approaches to things. I think we're going to talk today about a whole bunch of things, everything ranging from how you get into cyber if you're not from a technical cyber background, to mentoring, to being a mentee, to mental health, to well-being, to feminism, and if I know anything about Josephine, probably death to the patriarchy at some point. So without further ado, let's bring her on and let's start the conversation. Hey,
what a intro. Hey, Jake.
Thank you very much for joining us. Friend, also, I should have mentioned that this is Josephine's first ever time on a podcast, and she's decided to go all in straight with me on a live one with no script and no pre-scripted questions. So this was either very brave or very foolhardy. But I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, your company, your role. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Hi, everybody. My name's Josephine. I am Information Security Director at Codat. And I'm based here in London. I'm actually at the office today. And like Jake said, I'm going to chat about all things. It is quite literally Risky It All today with Jake.
Give me 1 second. I'm just being asked to relocate. I'll let you continue. You can answer 3 questions about yourself while I'm doing that, which is your hobby, your hero, and the biggest risk you ever took.
Let's go. So hobby is very easy for me. I'm an avid netball player. For those that aren't based in the UK or kind of New Zealand, Australia, netball is a sport that's kind of akin to basketball, but you can't move with the ball. You're stationary when you have the ball in hand, but everyone else can run around you. And I'm a typical goal defense, and I take that into my work life as well. Very defender in all senses of the word. So that's my hobby. What did Jake say was my next one?
Your hero. Who's your hero?
So I feel like I'm also diagnosed autistic, so I'm ASD, and I had to Google what hero was, like as a definition. It was someone, it kind of, Google said maybe noble, maybe inspiring. And it actually took me a long time to decide on who this would be. And as cliche as it sounds, I decided that it's my husband. It's Ben. I don't know if he's listening today, but he is very inspirational. He's dealt with a lot of adversity, especially in the last year, and there is no one else that I've seen kind of use the adversity to level up in the way that he has. And he inspires me kind of every single day. So definitely inspires me throughout the night. We've got a daughter. She was 15 months old yesterday and doesn't really like to sleep during the night. And he certainly inspires me when he goes and sorts her out in the night so I can stay asleep. So I appreciate him a whole bunch.
And did we cover the biggest risk you ever took?
That's the last one. Hey, Jake, you're back?
I'm back, but I'm no longer on video. I've been notified that in this specific location, which I can't disclose, I'm not video allowed. So I'm purely in audio form, which is probably better because people get to look at you rather than me. So everyone's a winner in reality. And Mad Dog, I have not been sacked. I'm going to sack Simon first. Carry on, Josephine.
So my last, what was the last question? The biggest risk that I took, other than coming on this podcast live with absolutely no script, it was actually jumping into the security compliance profession. So I initially had a job lined up. It was very, very standard grad role, Big Four, 2-year, 6-month secondments. And I ended up kind of being like, oh, but this software company is offering me as a job as a security compliance person. Didn't really know what that was. But they offered me quite a nice bit of money, like double the Big Four salary. So I thought if I could at least cling on to the job for 6 months, then I'll have got myself enough runway. So I made the leap, and yeah, very, very pleased with myself for doing that.
Perfect, thanks. I want to come back to that actually later. It's kind of the core topic. But one thing I always like to do once we introduce themselves is touch a bit on something that was recently in kind of cyber or infosec news that I think is interesting. The one that I think that's interesting at the moment is you probably saw that Apple like de-encrypted their connections in the UK. Did you hear about this in the last couple of weeks?
Briefly,
Okay,
it's not
fine.
something that I've read as much on.
No, it's fine, because my question is not specifically on the technical thing itself, but kind of how we feel about that. What you also come from a legal background, and we'll come to that in context soon. But the reason they did this is a difference between kind of the rights of a citizen to be able to have their data access by government and or police, wherever it might be, versus the American version, which is the right to encrypt your data regardless of what you've done, and you should never have to have it revealed. Where do you stand on that? Do you think government should have the right to know what's happened in these secret channels, or do you think we should be able to protect ourselves regardless of what we've done or been accused of?
Yes, that's super interesting, and I think that it encompasses a whole kind of array of ethics, because on the one hand you've got like the right to privacy, like a core principle of GDPR, and something that I think is so vital for everyday life. But then you also kind of have like your right to safety and all of the other things that they seem to somewhat conflict when you bring this argument up, because you could either have kind of issues with, it depends on the kind of data they're getting. Like if they're trying to get kind of WhatsApp pictures of my dog that I'm sending to my friends, like maybe that's unnecessary. I don't think that speaks well. Maybe it doesn't speak to public safety, but it could also be kind of a criminal gang that they need additional information on. So I think that it depends on the topic. And yeah, I actually don't have a stance. I think that I would always kind of veer more on right to safety versus right to privacy if I kind of had to align myself with one of those rights, but I'd be happy to be challenged. And it especially depends on the government as well. I think that there's a political element to it.
Well, let's challenge that. Which government would you trust and which wouldn't you?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, to be fair, it's a great question. I think the UK is fairly well governed. Like I studied constitutional law, and I do really respect the way that our constitution is set up. So I think with the checks and balances that we have in place, I would err on the side of kind of being okay being on the further to right to safety side of things.
What I found amazing today for everyone listening is the fact that when I'm not on camera, I feel like way more comfortable asking questions, which is slightly more awkward and politically sensitive. So this is good times.
On camera.
But you talked about being a student of law. So let's go there. I think one of the topics I want to talk about today was kind of traversing career paths into security, because obviously you've now ended a completely different profession to the one which you started in. And I think a lot of people do that in cyber. But talk to me a bit about your journey, a bit about kind of, I suppose, not just the how, but the why you decided to do it. I know you kind of touched on it at the beginning, but let's go a bit deeper on that one.
Definitely. So towards the end of my degree, I kind of got an inkling. I actually couldn't really be bothered to study anymore. I'd done kind of college and university. And to go on and become a qualified solicitor in the UK, you have to do another year of studying at a university, and then you have to find a training contract and do that for 2 years. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to do kind of more grown-up things. So I was like, okay, I can't bother to wait another 3 years. Let's see what I can do with this law degree from the moment I graduate. And I quite literally Googled like what you can do with a law degree that's not law. Compliance was one of the first things that popped up. So then I diligently Googled how to get into compliance. And the suggestions were mainly audit focused from what I could find on Google. So if you kind of go into an audit advisory role, and then you could move into the compliance space. So I set myself up. I wrote my dissertation on the UK's regulatory response to the financial crisis of 2009, and really got myself involved with what I thought like regulatory compliance. I felt that crossed my two worlds really well. So that's what I thought I wanted to do. Got offered the Big Four job in the summer before I graduated, and I was like, okay, in September, that's what I'll do. But in the meantime, I was working for a little software company, and it was called Workfront, a brilliant company. And I was there as a HR recruitment administrator, just part-time. And I found myself at a bit of a loose end. So I started to get more and more involved in the policy side of things. And then eventually being put in contact with their CISO. who I ended up going through interviews with the security team and being offered a job to stay there and move into a job as a risk and compliance analyst. I truly, like, cybersecurity wasn't on my radar at this time, and I didn't really understand how my role related to cyber. And yeah, it was very interesting at the time because I was like, I actually argued with the CISO and I was like, I don't want risk in my title. I don't care about that. I just care about compliance. I think this is what I want. I love risk now. Very pleased to be on my first podcast called Risking It All. It's a big part of my job and also like my identity. So yeah, it's quite funny now that I tried to argue to get that removed. But
So
oh,
you
sorry,
got
Jake.
into this, sorry, let me interrupt you. You got into this by doing something which was completely not in your job description, by
Yes,
kind of
yes,
accident almost, or it's like intrigue. And then
yes.
because you did it better than
Curiosity.
they probably had done it already themselves, because of your background, which, albeit not directly relevant, obviously having an understanding of law and how legal regulations
Yeah.
are written does help when you write policies and so forth. You then got asked if you would go further. That's correct, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it turned into, oh, who's this girl just knocking about, like reading our privacy notice and trying to make amendments to yeah, being offered a job. So it was quite a jump. But I think it was definitely like I kind of subscribe to the notion of like you make your own luck. So I think it was very lucky to kind of be in that position and get the job, but also there's an element of kind of always staying curious and trying to do as much as you can to get yourself in front of the right people to give you the luck.
What skills do you think, of the obvious ones of like policy and regulation, what skills do you bring from a legal study and maybe even the part-time recruitment role which help you in what you do now? Like, how do we gain skills from different professions to apply in another one that gives you the upper hand, I guess?
Yeah, so definitely the law degree really set me up so well for the certification. So ISO 27001, reading that standard is pretty similar to reading legislation and being able to interpret and apply it. So that's a really core skill. At my work here, I manage the SOC 2 audit and ISO certifications. And it really, really helps with that. And then also the policy writing as well. So it's that kind of corner of GRC where I really think that the legal degree comes into its own. But I think, yeah, more I think now about my roles before I graduated. So my part-time roles from kind of 16. I worked in a gym as a receptionist on the desk for a very long time. And I really discovered a love of like customer satisfaction, customer focused work. And that's something that I think really, really feeds into the role now, and the narrative that I push kind of outwardly about building trust with our customers. So how we really demonstrate to them that we are a company with integrity and we are a company with trust, because we're handling kind of accounting and financial data. So yeah, I think that kind of customer focused side of things is actually it's a part of my role now that I never foresaw, but it's something that I really, really enjoy. And yeah, not a huge overlap that you would perceive, but probably like half of my job is like customer focused.
Who do you think, and GRC is an interesting one because it's often looked at and talked about as being like sales enablement and enabling go-to-market functions. When you talk about your customer, is your customer internally, is it pleasing and helping supporting the function internally, or is your customer your kind of business's customers? Like, who is your primary customer?
That is a great question. My primary customer, I think, is the external customer, because I think that as a company, you're all expected to work towards that same goal, which is going to always be kind of increasing revenue, and that comes from more customers. So I think that, yeah, because you're all working towards that common goal, when I reference customers, I always mean external. But there is also definitely a acknowledgement that we do have internal customers as well, especially as we're a very small security team. So we get involved in everything kind of from the product side of things, all the way through to vendor risk management and all of those kind of things as well. So then my customer does become the internal person that's making the request. But I see that more as kind of being helpful and useful and partnering with someone as opposed to like the customer relationship.
I guess the next question I've got, and maybe it's a slightly combative one, but you obviously work in GLC. We talk a lot, and I talk a lot recently about transparency, the fact that we should get better at just telling people what we really are, warts and all. Like, but then your legal background and study comes from, and forgive me, but these are my opinions on lawyers, like your ability to like hide as much as possible in legal rhetoric and in text, rather than actually be like, I don't know many lawyers who are advocates for transparency. So when we come into that conversation, like, where do you sit? You kind of studied and spent time learning how to protect from transparency, but you're now in a world where everyone really wants to talk about transparency.
Yeah, so I have met lawyers who you're referencing to, who are definitely the loophole lookers. But I think all the lawyers that I know, especially the ones that work here, are very keen for transparency, and I think that that's because their job as well is risk mitigation. So the more clear you are, the more transparent you are, the less ambiguous you are, the less risk there is. So yeah, certainly it's the case for the legal counsel here that they are very transparent, and they mirror kind of my views on really being open and candid. And I say that with a caveat, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you, the list of all the findings of our penetration testing, because I don't think that that's necessary or relevant. But I certainly think that there's an element of talking about kind of your processes and how you're looking to improve things, and kind of the issues that you've had, and taking accountability and acknowledging them.
I'm going to continue to poke the bear, sorry, but why don't you think it's relevant and important? Say if I'm buying a product, I kind of want to know, there's two sides to it, right? Do I want your open vulnerabilities? Of course I do. Do I think you'll show them? Of course you won't. But do I want to see what you found and what you fixed? I think that's a relevant and fair question to ask.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. I think when it's the other side of the coin, I know that me and you, Jake, have spoken kind of about the vendor risk management and what we want to see from vendors when we're going out and asking them questions and we're trusting them with our data. I think it's really fair and really relevant to understand the processes, and also kind of how. So if we're talking about vulnerabilities, it's the secure software development lifecycle. Like, what does that look like? Have there been vulnerabilities in the past? Do you keep getting repetitive vulnerabilities? What's your time to patch that? Has that been audited and validated? They're the kind of questions that I'd ask, probably more so than what the actual vulnerabilities are. Obviously, it becomes relevant if it's repetitive, like always getting a cross-site scripting vulnerability, like probably train your engineers better. But if they're kind of sporadic and they're always those kind of medium risks, but they vary really significantly, I don't know if it's hugely relevant, because I don't really know anyone that has like a clean penetration test every time they're tested. And if they do, I'd say they probably need to pay more for their pen testing services.
Yeah, it's a fair argument. I'm a kind of an advocate that no one has any clean reports or audits or tests of any form, and we should
That's
get better
a red flag for me.
that.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
I'm seeing
clean, it's worrying.
Reports, exactly.
I'm going to ask one more question on the career. So if anyone has any questions to Josephine, please fire away. You've just got my voice in the darkness and her face on the screen. But what do you think, as you came across and you've now developed and built a career in cyber, what do you think are the things which you would say, if you like, or if you have skills A, B, and C, or you like A, B, and C, this is the right place for you, when maybe you're sitting in a different career, maybe you're in finance, law, anything else in between, and sitting there going, I don't really enjoy what I do. What do you think are the right things?
That is a great question. I think I'm having a total mind blank because I've now read all of the other questions.
It's all right, I'll come to those. Don't worry about those questions. You carry on this
one. The skills that, remind me what the question was.
What are the skills that you think, not the necessary crossover, but now you've gone into cyber, what are kind of three things you go, if you're good at this, or if you really like this, then cyber might be the right career for you, even if you've never even thought about it before?
Yes. So pragmatism, that's something that I will talk about till the cows come home. Like, if you're really like objective and that's something that I love, being objective. I think that it's an ASD trait as well, but being really, really like X, if it's X, then it equals Y. Like, that's very clear. And really being able to understand how risks relate to one another, and also impact your kind of risk posture as a whole. So I think, Jake, I know that me and you have kind of spoken that we're quite pro risk. We quite like it, but we still have to really understand what decisions lead to higher risk, what decisions lead to lower risk, and how everything kind of interlinks with one another. And I think that pragmatism is a really, really great skill. I also think that it's the customer focus element, so it's especially relevant more in the GRC cyberspace, as opposed to kind of the more like AppSec side. But it's customer focused, and you do always really care about the opinion of the customer and building that trust and maintaining that trust. And I think the last one is very similar to kind of the legal space, and quite ironic about what your opinion on lawyers, but integrity. So that's something that I feel like as a security person, like you have to live and die by integrity, because if you're not being really, really honest, and you're not kind of ensuring that you're protecting the data, like the buck does stop at you. And there are a lot of consequences, kind of personally and beyond, for the person that has happened to. So I think that they would be my top three. They're pretty vague, so maybe vagueness should be one too.
I like it, but it also shows quite a broadness, right? Because pragmatism is almost slightly a combination of binary nature of kind of 1 + 1 = 2, as well as being able to constantly shift and change what you're doing, your priorities around it. But then also this kind of customer or people focus, which I think is lost quite a lot in security. That actually it's quite a people-driven job. I think that's interesting. I think your integrity I'd agree with, although in the end, people listen to me because I have opinions, and hearing someone say lawyers and integrity in the same sentence kind of made me slightly flinch. So it's probably good that I'm not on camera, or else I'd have deeper questions being asked of me. But I'm going to pivot into neurodiversity, because I've been talking about this so much recently on podcasts. I had Rick on last, and I had Megan from Axonius not long ago talking about the same topics, and Adam Arellano talking about this as well a few months ago. I'm going to try and take Jason's two questions and paraphrase them into kind of one. But you talk about superpowers, and obviously that's something I've talked about. It's quite near to my heart. Is that we get obsessed in our world with the fact that when people have a thing they're good at, they should go and find the things they're bad at and fix those. And I think often what we actually realize is that someone's superpower is what they should work on. Make your superpower more super. Like find what you're gifted at and do it even better. His question is kind of like, as a neurodivergent, like what do you think the superpowers are that you possess? And I think to go into the next question, also there's like, how do you leverage those as strengths to succeed when you're applying for an interview or talking about a position? How do you like sell actually? Like, is it a strength? And I think that's important, right? How do we talk about these things as being not just we can accept them, but we can actually benefit from them?
Absolutely. And I think as well, I quite often joke when like parents now, as I've got a bit older, tell me that their children are being diagnosed as autistic or ADHD or some kind of other like neurodiversity. I joke that capitalism is going to treat them well, because normally the jobs that require the most kind of analytical skill, the pragmatism, they're the ones that are pretty lucrative. And yes, they may deal with maybe like not having any friends at school. Like I don't have many kind of primary school friends. Friends told me that they would only play with me on a Wednesday. My mum had to go into school. It was very sad when you think about it, kind of very long time ago. But they're skills that you take into kind of adulthood and you can really, really use to your benefit. And I think that the world is coming along quite quickly and understanding that there's a lot of benefits to being neurodiverse. And I know in your podcast last week that was it Jeff spoke
Rick.
about
His name's Rick.
I kept getting that wrong. Rick spoke about kind of all people that did amazing things. So kind of like Turing and all of those pioneers were autistic, because that's how you kind of think creativity, and that's the analytical and the skill that really drives change.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you're interviewed, do you talk about it or not? Like, say if someone said to you, like, tell me about your skills, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses, would you bring it up in either category? Would you focus on it, or would you leave it completely as it's a part of my persona, but it's not something I need that's relevant to this conversation?
That's a great question. I don't typically bring it up. It's not something I don't think that I tick even in the box that I would like consider myself to have a disability. I think as well, like there's kind of the narrative around the concept of a disability as well. So I think that I don't tend to tick that box, but I certainly wouldn't ever deny it. If someone said, oh, you've got, so my little brother calls them Aspie traits. I think formerly when it was called Asperger's, that's what he called it. So if someone were to ever be like, oh, you seem a bit autistic, I'd be like, oh yeah, that is something that I have. but not something that I would be particularly forthcoming with. And not because I'm ashamed of it, but because I don't think that it's necessarily relevant. And I think it's a spectrum. So it doesn't mean that you can be kind of bucketed and been like, oh, so that means that she's a really, really terrible communicator, but really, really great analytically. Because I let them work that out for themselves.
I guess that's my question really. I kind of going to dig a little bit deeper, but you obviously refrain from it because your natural inclination went to using the word disability fairly quickly. When like the first question commented and called it superpower and talked about like, and you go back to Rick talking about, and I agree, this kind of ability to think out of the box of the modern versions of like Zuckerberg and Musk, whatever you think of them politically, like their mindset and their position on the spectrum has allowed them to see visionary into the future of how the world was and is. So I guess that's my point. Do you think, and obviously you said that you haven't done it, but do you think there's a place that you would sit down and interview and say straight away, like, I identify as autistic or as ADHD or as ADD, whatever it might be, and this is why that makes me better for this job, without saying, but I can do this. Like you go naturally to the, I'm defending a disability rather than saying these are the skills I've got because of.
Yeah, I hear you. I still wouldn't. I think that because of the kind of last point that I said, that it's a spectrum, and I don't think that being autistic or having ADHD necessarily means that you possess every skill that's listed under it. But you definitely can talk about the skills that you're really great at. But I think that doesn't change whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. And then you can talk about the skills that you have, the things that you're really good at, and why that's relevant for the role. And there's actually kind of I'd call it a side hustle, but I've never received any kind of pay beyond maybe a box of chocolates. But something that I really, really love to do is kind of work on CVs. And that's a really like analytical part of my mind, where I really like to take the information kind of from the job description and from what the person is telling me that they've done in the past, and really, really make that into like this tick box exercise, and really, really address the skills that are needed to succeed, that the job description, other jobs that person's interested in is pointing towards, and actually how that fits in, and kind of making X equal Y in a really, really like clear and concise way. And that's something that I think is actually a really, really, that's a skill that comes from some kind of hybrid of the autism ADHD that I possess. But I couldn't really put my finger on which one it falls into, whether it's also just a part of my personality as well. So yeah, I don't think that I can't separate kind of Joey from the Aspie, I guess, is maybe what I'm trying to say.
That's interesting. I'm going to pivot to one last topic because I never have women on my show without asking the same questions. And that is, right now, do you think it's, and I think I know your answer because we've talked about it before, but do you think it's a blessing or a curse to be a woman in cyber right now?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I feel very grateful to be a woman in cyber. And I don't think that I've necessarily experienced direct adversity for being a woman in cybersecurity. However, it is remarkable how poor the diversity in cybersecurity is. And I know that Simon very kindly posted about mentees, but if there is anybody with any kind of diversity that's looking to break into cyber, whether that's kind of gender, ethnicity, religion, please do reach out to me. Like, I am so passionate about making sure that other people enter the profession. And there have been so many rooms that I've been in where I am the only woman there. I'm very, very, very rarely in calls where there is only women, and they're normally because they're the community women calls. And I've been to conferences where there's workshops with 40, 50 people, and I'm the only woman in there. And I think it's a disadvantage, because it's a disadvantage for everyone, because there is just a lack of diversity, which leads to a lack of diversity in thought, which means that we're only going to get a small subset of opinions, which isn't good for change. And we need some change.
I agree. I've talked several times in this podcast before about my daughter, Isabel, who's 7, and the fact that I've tried relentlessly to get her into tech and cyber. And I think maybe I'll get there one day. But how do we do it? Is it an educational failing? Is it a cultural failing? Is it a failing that everyone promoting and therefore progressing people is male? Like, where is the failure and what is the, I mean, there's multiple fixes, but where's the place we start to trying to solve that problem?
Yeah, so I think the first place to start isn't by asking the women. I think that isn't everyone problem, and kind of pushing the focus on to the pipeline, but also kind of the day-to-day rooms that you're finding yourself in. And I know, Jake, you've done a great job. I know that there's rooms that you've put me in because you've noticed that there's a distinct lack of diversity. And I think that that's a great example of men being allies and ensuring that they are working towards making cybersecurity more inclusive. And I think that's such a key part of it. And it's being an ally just means looking out for women. It just means looking out for people that are diverse by religion or ethnicity, and just ensuring that they are represented as well. And I think that it's really, really key to remember that, like, by giving these people opportunities, it doesn't mean that other people that are more privileged don't then get those opportunities. So we're not taking away, we're just kind of elevating and ensuring that we're putting everybody on that same kind of pedestal. And obviously in cybersecurity, there is a specific need for skills like analytical minds and pragmatism, and they might fall more into being kind of more male dominated skills. But should that be where the focus is, or should it be on different areas, or should each kind of a portion of security have their own skills that we look for in a unique way? I definitely don't have kind of any real answers, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make those changes. So if anyone does have any ideas, or certainly I know that Simon's very kindly popped my LinkedIn profile there, but if I can be of any help, or kind of get you into those rooms like Jake has done for me, then please let me know, because I would love to help where I can.
Yeah, Josephine, for those doing LinkedIn, is actually looking for someone or people to mentor and to support, whether that is from neurodivergent or any form of diverse community, or women, or anyone actually in general, who's
Or
looking to try and
parents.
work out how they progress. Sorry?
Or parents. That's
Or parents,
working
yeah.
mums especially.
There you go. Everything in between. Look, it's been fascinating. I apologize to the people who have not had to look at my face, and then I apologize for just presenting you entirely and making you scared on your first podcast. Well, I disappeared into a dark corner, but it's been amazing. I think your husband was actually listening. I think I saw him pop up at one point. So she's done a fantastic job, Ben. I have a tradition that I stole off of the Diary of a CEO podcast by Stephen Bartlett, which I've done on every podcast since, which is to ask a guest the final question that comes from my previous guest, where they have no knowledge of what the question is. You got Rick, who is deeply technical. So I apologize in advance slightly. I've tried to reframe the question he asked one that was horrible. But in a basic, he talks about agentic AI and the fact that we already have call center agents, and the future of what AI can do in terms of replacing mundane or kind of repetitive tasks. And his question is, do you think it will spell the end of the beginnings of cyber, the beginning of the end? So tier 1, tier 2, SOCs, analysts, are we going to see these disappear, and will it eventually creep its way up until it's better than a CISO? Is agentic AI the end of cybersecurity? That's his question.
That is a great question. I feel like, let's go further. Is agentic AI just going to be the end of us all? Like, who knows right now? No, I don't think that it is. I think AI is a very core part of kind of my role, and kind of ensuring that the development within the business is really secure, from kind of a data protection, data security point of view. So I think that it's interesting, because I've read a lot of studies of it kind of taking that lower level work, so the typical kind of junior work out, which will inherently cause kind of pipeline issues as you go up the management. So I definitely think that there will be issues, kind of the skills gap that maybe is a myth or not a myth might become a real thing. And how we protect against that, and how we ensure that we're kind of still training the workforce of the future to have those skills that you do need. And I know, kind of, Jake, you speak a lot about your role as a CISO now is very advisory. It's very kind of ingesting information, mulling on it, really kind of pulling on from different sources, being pragmatic, and then kind of delivering some advice. And I don't see a world where agentic AI is ever going to be able to take that over, or at least not like in our lifetime. So do we really need to worry about it?
So who cares?
Exactly.
It's interesting because One of the things that I've been about this in this sphere, and I've got two thoughts. One is related to what you said, which is the fact that there'll always be a need for like mid and senior management, but maybe not at the bottom tier. And I think the worry of that is that most of us in mid and senior management roles gained our experience by being at the bottom of the tier. So your point of like that pipeline, I completely agree. If you can't gain the fundamentals, you can't advise on the fundamentals. So I think there's a problem there. The second one, that when you say will it replace us all, our VP of HR, Yara Fatila, if anyone wants to look up on LinkedIn, is obsessed with the fact that she's speaking nicely to ChatGPT. She says says hello and good morning and stuff to it because she's terrified that one day it'll take over the world, and because she's the one that were nice, it won't enslave her. I don't know if that's a tinfoil hat theory or there's some legitimate reality in that, but who knows? Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to try and get you back on for everyone listening in a couple of months, probably with a couple of other women as well, and have a deeper conversation on the gender diversity problems. I think that's really relevant and needs to be talked about right now. Anyone has any questions for Josephine, please reach out to her, ping her on LinkedIn if you're interested in learning more or being mentored or want to have a conversation around any form of diversity or transferring skill sets or changing career paths. I'm sure she'll go for the conversation. Thank you all as ever for listening. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Josephine, thank you very much. Do you have any final thoughts before we close?
No, I don't. But are you going to ask me the question that I get to share with the
only
next
offline?
person?
No, okay, I don't want the next, because the next person might watch it and know what they're going to get asked, right? That ruins the whole point.
Okay, yeah, that's smart.
Thank you very much, Josephine. I appreciate your time. We'll have you back again soon. But yeah, appreciate your comments, your transparency, and your openness and authenticity. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake, and thank you everybody else for listening as well.
Lots of questions.